Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like our listeners have been sending in articles about Canada, huh? Immigration policy changes.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be a hot topic. Lots of buzz around this one.
And I get it, right? You see the headlines and think, okay, what's the real story here? We've got reports, statements from the government, even businesses are chiming in.
Seems like Canada might be switching things up. Big time.
That's what we're here to figure out. So let's dive in, shall we? The big news. Canada's pumping the brakes on immigration. Big change from what they were initially planning, eh? 500,000 new permanent residents.
For a year?
Yeah, in 2025 and 2026, that was the goal.
Ambitious, for sure.
Huge. But those plans, well, let's just say they've been adjusted.
Scaled back might be a gentler way to put it.
Okay, scaled back. So what's the new target?
395,000 next year.
Still a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the expectation is that number will keep dropping in the years after. It's a big shift. Trudeau's calling it a rebalancing, but, well, a lot of people see it as more of a U-turn, especially after the pandemic when Canada was really pushing for immigration.
Yeah, I remember those campaigns. What happened? Why the sudden change of heart?
Well, Trudeau admitted the initial plan, it just wasn't the right balance, you know?
Didn't quite hit the mark.
Exactly. There's been a growing chorus of criticism, about how this rapid population growth is impacting things. Housing affordability being a major concern, especially with interest rates already going up.
I can see how that'd be a worry for a lot of Canadians. Makes sense. Now, I know you've been digging into some internal government documents from a couple years back.
Oh, yeah.
What those have to say? Anything interesting?
What's fascinating is that these documents, they actually predicted a lot of these problems. Housing, strain on social services, even potential for exploitation.
Exploitation?
Yeah, within the temporary foreign worker programs.
So not exactly a surprise then, huh?
Not really. And that's where Trudeau's criticism of businesses and those educational institutions comes into play.
Okay, fill me in.
He's accusing some companies of, well, abusing those temporary worker programs, putting profits ahead of fair wages.
So kind of saying businesses are part of the problem?
That's how it's coming across, yeah. And he's also calling out some colleges and universities, saying they're bringing in way more international students than these communities can actually handle, almost like they're using them as a cash cow.
A revenue stream.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a blame game, isn't it?
Sounds like it. Is this a new strategy for him?
Definitely a shift in tone. Makes you wonder, is this genuine? Is he trying to fix things, or is it just political maneuvering?
Deflecting some heat.
Maybe. And this is where understanding those reactions from different groups comes in. Business groups, politicians, everyday Canadians.
You're right. We've got reports on all that. Let's start with businesses. How are they taking this policy shift?
Businesses, especially the ones already struggling to find workers, they're pushing back hard.
Makes sense. Less immigration, less potential workers.
Right. They're saying this is just going to make the labor shortage worse, hurt the economy.
What about specifics? Any groups speaking out?
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, they've been pretty vocal, saying the government keeps changing the rules.
Making it tough for businesses to plan.
Exactly. Abrupt and constant changes, that's how they put it.
Not ideal, that's for sure. What about the politicians? What are they saying?
Oh, well, the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, he didn't hold back, said Trudeau, quote, can't fix the immigration system he broke.
Ouch.
Straight to the point, right?
Yeah.
And Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, he's calling for even more action. Says the cuts don't go far enough.
Different perspectives all around. But beyond the finger pointing, what does this actually mean for Canada? On the ground, how will these changes play out?
Well, the government's estimates are pretty interesting. They're saying Canada's population will actually shrink a bit in 2025 and 2026, like 0.2%, which sounds small, but...
Context.
Right. Think about this. Just this past July, our population grew by 3% year over year, way more than usual.
Yeah, 0.2% decrease suddenly seems like a big swing.
It's like slamming on the brakes after going full speed ahead. Now, you'd think this would have economists freaking out, right?
That's what I'd assume.
Actually, some are welcoming this slowdown,
Yeah.
saying it could help with the whole housing crisis, especially with those rising interest rates we talked about.
Okay, I can kind of see the logic there.
Right. One BMO economist even called the strain on our economy almost debilitating.
Strong words.
Yeah. So maybe this is a chance to let things cool down a bit.
Stabilize.
Right. But that still leaves the question of those businesses that need immigrant labor.
Good point.
How do they survive if the flow of new workers is cut off? Well, the government has a plan for that. Kind of interesting, actually. They're shifting the focus. Instead of bringing in new immigrants, they're going to prioritize those who are already here.
The temporary residents.
Exactly. They're aiming to give over 40% of those new permanent residency spots to people who are already in Canada.
Interesting strategy. Why the focus on those already here?
They're calling it a softer landing. Less impact on housing and all that. These folks already have jobs. They're contributing to the economy. Seems less risky.
Makes sense. Sort of controlling the flow instead of just cutting it off completely.
That's the idea. And the immigration minister even said this could help with that housing shortage. He's estimating Canada will need to build 670,000 fewer homes by 2027 to close that gap.
Wow, that's a lot of houses. Okay, so we've covered why Canada is making this shift, how the changes are going to work. But what does it actually mean for the country? Like, big picture, what are we looking at here? This is where things get really interesting.
I know, right? This is where we go beyond the numbers and start thinking about those big questions. What's the relationship between the economy and social well-being? Can Canada keep growing without tearing itself apart?
Can we have it all?
Right. And can we fix those housing problems and those struggling social services while still getting the talented people we need? Tough questions.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. It's a lot to think about for sure. You start to see how all these things are connected.
Absolutely.
Businesses worried about finding workers, politicians, well,
Doing what politicians do.
Exactly. And then every day people just trying to get by, with the cost of everything going up. No wonder immigration is such a
Touchy subject.
Yeah, touchy. It's like it hits on everything.
Right.
But underneath it all, I keep coming back to this one question. Can Canada actually find a way to make immigration work in a way that, helps everyone?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
A sustainable model.
Yeah.
One that balances the economic needs with keeping society strong.
Right. Because we've always welcomed immigrants, right? It's part of who we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they've always been crucial to everything. Building the economy, the culture. I mean, it's woven into our identity.
But, and it's a big but, there are those concerns, right? Can our cities, our hospitals, our schools, can they handle all these new people? Especially if it keeps happening so fast.
That's the dilemma. It's not just us either, It's global.
Oh, really? So other countries are dealing with this too? Same pressure?
Same housing struggles, same debates about jobs and wages that need to find a balance, keep things fair. It's everywhere.
Wow. So this isn't just some Canadian thing, huh? It's like we're all part of this big
Cultural experiment.
Yeah, exactly. Figuring out how to do immigration right for everyone. High stakes, though, when you put it that way.
Absolutely. And speaking of high stakes, let's circle back to that plan we talked about.
Yeah.
Giving permanent residency to those temporary folks who are already here. That's a big change, and it raises some interesting questions, especially around fairness.
Yeah, this one really stood out to me, too. On the one hand, it makes total sense. I mean, these people are already here, they're working, they're part of our communities.
Integrated, yeah.
Right. Why not make it official? And it helps with those concerns about putting too much strain on things, right? Like housing we talked about.
It's a way to acknowledge their contributions, too. Show we value them. But then the flip side is, does this create like a two-tier system, where people who happen to already be here get an advantage over those who are trying to come in from outside?
Exactly. What about those with all the right skills, the qualifications, everything, but they're stuck waiting in line somewhere else?
Tough question. Does it make the system unfair to them? Or is it more about recognizing the reality on the ground? Saying, hey, these folks are already here, they're contributing, let's make it official. What's the priority, right? Smoothing things out here or being completely fair to everyone everywhere.
So it's a trade-off, huh?
Always is. With immigration, it's never simple. Depends what we value most as a country.
If it's just about the bottom line, about keeping the economy humming, then yeah, maybe focusing on who's already here makes sense. But if it's about being fair, about opportunity for everyone, that's a whole other thing.
And those aren't always the same thing, are they? That's why these conversations are so important. We have to weigh all these different sides, figure out what matters most, what kind of Canada we want to build.
Well said. Now, before we move on, there's one thing from those reports we haven't talked about yet. That whole focus on French-speaking immigrants.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big part of the plan, right? The government wants to bump it up to 10% by 2027. That's a big jump from where we are now.
Big jump. It's only 6% this year,
So what's the thinking there?
It's about protecting our two official languages, making sure French stays strong, especially outside Quebec.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about
Culture?
Yeah, culture and where people settle, you know.
Mm,
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
yeah.
But it all comes back to that big question, doesn't it? Will this plan actually work?
Can Canada have its cake and eat it too?
Huh. Right. Grow the economy, keep everyone happy. It's a tall order.
It is. And let's be real, there are going to be hiccups, surprises.
Yeah.
That's how these things go. But hey, that's policy making for you, right? Trying to juggle a million things at once and hopefully land on your feet.
It's like a constant balancing act.
That's one way to put it. And it matters because we're talking about people's lives, their futures, the whole future of this country. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? So important to talk about.
I agree. And by talking about it, really getting into it, by asking those tough questions, that's how we hold those leaders accountable. That's how we make a difference.
So, where do we go from here? What are the big things we should be looking out for as this whole thing unfolds?
I'm glad you asked. I think first and foremost, we got to keep an eye on the economy. Will this slowdown actually make things better? Will it help with housing, with all those essential services?
Right, right. Or will it make things worse? Businesses can't find workers, the whole thing backfires.
Exactly. We need to look at what actually happens, not just what the politicians are saying. You know, data over drama,
Data over drama. I like that. Okay, so we're watching the numbers. What else?
the social stuff, the cultural impact. That's huge. How does all this change who we are as a country?
Hmm.
Do we become less welcoming? Do all these changes cause more division?
Yeah, especially in a place like Canada. We pride ourselves on being diverse.
And let's not forget about the people at the heart of it all.
Yeah.
The immigrants themselves, those who are already here and those who are still hoping to come. What happens to their lives, their dreams?
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but it's their stories that matter.
Absolutely. Their experiences. We can't lose sight of that
Hmm.
because it's not just numbers. It's about real people, real lives. And it's about what kind of country we want to be. Are we living up to those values we talk about? Fairness, compassion. Are we giving those newcomers a real chance to make a good life here?
Those are the questions, huh?
Big ones. And as this whole thing plays out, it's going to be fascinating to watch, right? See how the government reacts, how businesses adapt, the immigrants themselves, how they make their voices heard. It's like we're all part of this big social experiment
A big, messy social experiment.
with long-lasting consequences. And that's why it's so important to stay engaged, stay informed, to speak
Wow.
up, to make our voices heard. Because these choices, they're going to shape Canada for a long, long time.
Wow, I feel like my head is spinning so many angles, so many different perspectives. It's amazing how this one policy change connects to, well, everything, right?
It's true. Economics, social values, what's happening in other countries,
Yeah.
it all ties in.
Yeah. So, for our listener who's been on this wild ride with us, we've looked at why Canada's doing this whole immigration shakeup, the good, the bad, the ugly, and heard what everyone's saying about it. But
Yeah.
where does that leave them? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this is all still unfolding, right?
Mhm.
It's not set in stone. How well this works, how it all plays out, it depends on what Canadians do.
That's a good point. It's not just about watching from the sidelines.
And our listener, they've got all this knowledge now from this deep dive. They can actually be part of the conversation.
That's powerful. It's not just about understanding, it's about doing something, engaging, debating, holding those leaders accountable.
Exactly. And here's something we didn't really touch on directly in those reports, but it's connected to everything we've talked about. While Canada's figuring all this out, so is everyone else.
Really? So it's not just a Canadian story.
No, it's global. Think
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah.
All those things we talked about, housing struggles, debates about jobs, trying to find that balance between the economy and keeping society, functioning.
Not falling apart.
Right. It's happening everywhere. The decisions Canada makes, they could actually teach other countries a thing or two.
Wow. So our listener, they're not just learning about Canada, they're getting this whole global perspective. That's amazing.
And that brings us to our final thought, I guess. In this world where everything's connected, people moving around, everyone facing the same problems, thinking critically, having real conversations, being an active citizen, that's more important than ever.
It's not just about Canada's future, it's about the future we're all building together.
Well said. I think we've given our listener a lot to think about.
We definitely have. Thanks for joining us and guiding us through this complex topic. And to our listener, keep those questions coming because knowledge is power and, well, there's always more to learn.